Football is more than a sport. It's emotion, culture, identity. It is the language spoken in every corner of the planet. But sometimes, football becomes more than a game. Sometimes, it holds the power to pause hatred, silence guns, and stop a war. Our story begins in Central America. In 1969, two countries, Honduras and El Salvador, were standing on the edge of conflict. Tensions had been rising for years. Land disputes, migration issues, and political rivalries fueled anger on both sides. The people were restless. Governments were under pressure. Soldiers were mobilizing. Everyone knew something was about to break. And then came the World Cup qualifiers. Honduras versus El Salvador. On the calendar, just another match. On the ground, a symbol of everything these nations stood for. For Honduras, defending their pride. For El Salvador, a chance to prove themselves on the world stage. What happened next would forever be remembered as one of the strangest and most powerful intersections of sport and war. The first leg was played in Tegucigalpa, the capital of Honduras. The atmosphere was electric, tense, almost violent. Fans shouted, sang, clashed. The match itself was hard, physical, brutal. Honduras won 1-0. For Salvadorans, it was a national humiliation. For Hondurans, it was celebration, but mixed with fear, because everyone knew the rivalry had grown darker. Days later, the second leg was played in San Salvador, the capital of El Salvador. The hostility was overwhelming. Honduran players described the atmosphere as terrifying. Crowds camped outside their hotel all night, banging drums, setting off fireworks, making sure they couldn't sleep. The stadium was a cauldron of anger. On the pitch, the Salvadoran players were fighting for more than goals. They were fighting for national pride. El Salvador won 3-0, and then the unexpected happened. For 90 minutes, while the match was being played, something extraordinary took place. The borders grew quiet. Soldiers, who had been preparing for war, stopped and listened to the commentary. Families gathered around radios and televisions. For a short time, hatred was forgotten. Honduras and El Salvador were not enemies. They were rivals in sport, united by a single game. Football paused the war, but only for a moment, because as soon as the final whistle blew, tensions reignited. The matches had become more than football. They were symbols of dignity, pride, and political struggle. And when El Salvador eventually won the third decisive playoff game on neutral ground in Mexico, the anger exploded. On July 14, 1969, El Salvador launched a military offensive against Honduras. Bombers flew, soldiers crossed the borders. The world watched in shock as a full-scale war began, all of it tied, in the eyes of history, to a football match. It lasted 4 days. It claimed thousands of lives, and it became known as the Football War. But even in this darkness, people remembered the strange, fragile peace that football created. Those 90 minutes when the guns were silent, when enemies became fans, when two nations could see each other not as soldiers, but as players, teams, humans. The war ended quickly, under international pressure, but the scars lasted decades. Political disputes were never truly solved, and the bitterness lingered. Yet the story of those matches lived on, not just as a tragic reminder of how sport can inflame tensions, but as a powerful symbol of how it can also unite. Football did not stop the war forever, but it did something just as important. It showed us what is possible. Because if a simple game can bring peace, even briefly, then maybe peace is not as far away as we think. Think about it. A ball, some players, a stadium full of people. And for 90 minutes, the world changed. Football is not just the beautiful game, it is the human game. And in 1969, it proved its power, not to conquer, not to destroy, but to remind us of what we share. The war is remembered, but so is the pause, so is the silence, so is the day football stopped a war.